rated, and we got through with with the fire department.
Nice.
Their wash go up to 50 times.
Cool.
And they do have a rating for Scotty came up with them.
Go by the bank.
Huh?
To the bank. Left of it.
Wow. Kind of fast.
Oh, Dean, put your headphones on. Just kidding. I can't harass you. I'm not next to you anymore.
You can
I know, you
harass it
missed me.
virtually, Beth.
Yeah, I know.
Virtual harassment.
I'm going to get in trouble.
Oh. I don't know why Rochelle Armstrong's name is on the screen. That's kind of curious.
Is it the Chambers?
Yes, unless she's visiting today or something.
Yeah.
Beth, are you in tomorrow so I can bring POs and stuff up to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, that's here. Jeff's the head of the infrastructure committee, and it looks like we're still waiting for him.
Okay.
Sure, he'll be here shortly.
Mayor, were you able to open Zoom in the council chambers? Guess you can't hear me.
All the counselors are here, and Jeff's here. Curious why Rochelle Armstrong is attending the meeting.
Can you change the name on your side?
I can't, no.
Oh,
But it doesn't really matter. I mean, she'd be welcome if you were attending, but just curious about it.
That is weird.
I can't see Jeff. Must be because I don't have enough room on my iPad.
Yeah, I think you have to slide over.
You got 2 pages, or you can go
Oh.
back and speaker view and look at whoever's speaking.
Oh, okay.
That happens to be you, Beth.
Is everybody ready?
Yeah. Sure.
Mayor, were you going to try to zoom through the council chambers window? Computer?
Computer? Can't quite figure it out, but I'll give it another try.
Guess not. Okay. Can the mayor hear us?
Yeah.
Mayor, are you with us and ready to go?
Yep, but I need 2 places at once.
Is everyone all set?
Yeah, I'm ready to go when you are, Jeff.
Oh, okay, very good. I'd like to call the City Infrastructure Committee meeting for April 8th, 2020 to order. Can I have a roll call of members?
Councilor Moore?
Here.
Councilor Gibbs?
Here.
Mayor Reed?
Here.
Councilor Barfeld?
Here.
Councilor Kelly?
Here.
Councilor DeDominicus? Councilor McFarland?
Okay, we'll proceed with reports from department representatives and discussion with councilors. Is either Mike there or?
Yes. Both there.
Did you have any reports for us this week?
Counselor, no, we don't have a report. I sent you all a picture of the leaf pickup we're doing. There's a mountain of leaves, like I told you, because everybody's staying home and they're raking their lawns and piling up next to the curb and out the roadway. So we're doing a lot of basically street cleanup this week into next. Projects, Mike, we're just sitting back waiting to see what happens with this, what's going on, the virus and everything. Any questions?
Okay, thanks.
Well, I do have a question.
Go ahead, Counselor.
So I just heard you say with everything going on in the country right now and in the state with the virus, I'm sure you're not certain of the fate of your projects. So that includes the Cogan Avenue rebuild. Is that also certain at this point?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Hold on.
Project, probably the best update I can give you is the consulting engineer, he's been in contact with the lady working on the project. Obviously, she has to work from home, so there's a certain amount of it she can't complete as far as the design goes. So we're still moving forward on the design end, but we really can't get back with the full speed on that just yet.
That project seems jinxed.
It is, yes.
Mayor, just so you know, whenever, sorry. Mayor, when you put everybody up, it shows up on the live stream. You can't hear me. Mayor?
Yeah, I can kind of hear you. How about we just continue to muddle on?
No, it was work. It did work. If you put everybody up on the window, it came through the live stream fine.
Is it on right now?
No. Oh, yep. Now it's good.
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
Well, Jay, at this time too, I'd like to suggest, I noticed that in my walking around that, a lot of people don't edge their sidewalks. I know in some places the sidewalks have gotten quite narrow. The actual sidewalk isn't that narrow, but if they pushed back the growth that has gotten in there, we would find that our sidewalks are a lot wider than we thought.
You can have them test that when we get to the office. Counselor? Counselor, we're gonna test that to the building inspector's office.
Yeah, yeah, well, yeah, I've never seen so many people out walking and doing their yards since the past week.
We got a tremendous amount of leaves up for the landfill. About, I think one third already for this season.
Well, we're all set to fill it up. So I wanted to remind everybody that, like Mike said, they'll be picking those leaves up in the next 3 weeks or so. So if you have something, please put it out by the curb.
Clear bags.
Did anyone else have any questions for Public Works? If not, we'll move on to agenda items to be brought forward, department to be approved by the committee and recommended to the council. Would entertain a motion to do so.
I actually wanted to talk about agenda item 2.1. And I emailed everybody about this earlier today. I don't know why all three of those items are put together and whether or not separated, because what are they going towards? Parking fund, water fund? What's the other one? It's general fund. To adjust the general fund, parking fund, and water fund. Seems to me those should have all gone as separate items, because I think they should have come through individual committees. This parking fund is public safety, water fund is infrastructure. And I also had questions about them.
Parking fund isn't listed as public safety. It's my understanding that, CD, Community Development, has got charge of the parking fund as well as the Chase and engineering work that's being done through the general fund and the CD accounts. So when I sent these about 3 weeks ago, I wasn't sure what committee they're going to go through, but it seems like it's appropriate for them to go through infrastructure because of public works, because of parking improvements, and because of the Chase and engineering services to complete the work on the DRI.
So the request is to, if I understood this correctly, it's to pull the money from the general fund?
No. The first one is a general fund adjustment to add 25,500 to the CD account that you see there, 1633-4330, which is contract services. It's coming out of appropriated fund balance. That's a general fund alone. The second one is the parking fund, where there was 2 accounts budgeted for $2,000 back during the budget process, and somehow one of them got dropped. I don't know if it was a cut or if it was just an entry error, but at this point, they need $1,850 put back into the materials and supplies. That's all parking fund once again. Parking fund is number 3, so that's coming out of the appropriated fund balance for the parking fund. The last one is for public works. Actually, it's their piece of the water fund budget. It's under, I believe it's transmission and distribution. And this is where their budgeted amount was supposed to be 70,000, and somehow it's only been 7,000. So there's 63,000 under budgeted, and they needed to increase that to be able to operate this year. So it's 3 separate funds, but it seems to make sense that they go together as infrastructure issues.
So it's coming, I'm sorry if I'm being dense here. It's coming to the general fund or out of general fund?
Actually, they're three separate budget adjustments, and they're hard to understand. I understand that. When a budget account has to be adjusted, it's either being transferred from another account or taken out of the appropriated fund balance account. In each case here, the general fund's the first one, and you see the 1-0599. That's appropriated fund balance for the general fund. The second one is for the parking fund, and the third one is for the water fund. They're independent funds. There's no crossover of funds. There's nothing being funded from one fund to the other. They're all individual appropriations and need to be increased for three separate funds.
Why can't they just all come from contract services?
Pardon me?
Why can't they come from contract services?
Well, they're not, CD contract services is one account, materials and supplies is another one. They're different budget items within the budgets of the different funds.
No, I understand that. I didn't ask the question correctly, Richard. I'm sorry.
That's all right. It's a lot of this is hard to understand, but it's because it's government fund accounting, and it's very intricate because every fund has its own budget, and funds have to be maintained separately, like little cookie jars on top of the shelf. The grocery money's in one, the gas money's in the other, the entertainment money's in the third. They don't get commingled, and we can't move expenses from one fund to the other without adding what's called an interfund transaction that has to be paid back to a fund if another fund is covering expenses for that fund. So none of that's happening here. These are three individual budget adjustments to three different funds. And they were all put together because basically Matt's in charge of two of the budgets. Mike Brody's in charge of the other one, their infrastructure, community development, and public works. That doesn't look like it's clarified it for you though, does it?
Well, no, I'm just thinking, I understand totally what you're saying, but I guess I'm wondering, because everyone knows that our finances are in dire shape. We all know that. And I'm wondering if it wouldn't be better to make that kind of, what did you call it, an intra-fund transfer, where is that how you worked it? Where you make the adjustments. I understand what you're saying. You've got to keep the funds separate. I understand that part. But contract services is something that every department has. And I'm wondering if we could make adjustments within the line items so that they come out of, like, basically change the allocation of where the money comes from out of contract services. I don't know if I'm making any sense at all.
Well, yeah, contracted services is all the 4,000 accounts. And within that, there's one called contract services. But what we have to make certain we do is if we're paying a water fund expense, it has to come out of the water fund cash. If we're paying a parking fund expense, it comes out of the parking fund cash. Same for the general fund. We can't pay bills for another fund unless we set up an interfund transaction with a promise to repay it. So we can't commingle expenses. We can't decide, okay, if there's a parking expense for materials and supplies, why don't we just cover that out of public works? Well, then what you're doing is you're covering an expense for the parking fund out of the general fund, and that should create an interfund transaction where the parking fund has to pay back the general fund for that loan. And also, if we start moving expenses around within funds, you're going to distort your comparison of your expenses year over year, when you look at last year versus this year. I know that everybody wants to move things around, but the government accounting controls us from doing that.
You made that very clear. Thank you. So these requests are not because the money is needed right now, but it's anticipated that the money would be needed?
Well, yes, actually, Shays and Engineering, Matt, he's not online to explain the details, but their project has had some change orders as far as the work that's being done. And the change orders have required some additional funding. And those DRI expenses that we're advancing, some of those are going to be reimbursed. In fact, the majority of them, some of them aren't. I believe this is part of what we're going to get reimbursed for Shays and Engineering's work on the DRI. Just like last week, approved a capital project increase for the demolition that's going on down at Green Street. Took it from 400,000 to 440,000. So we need the additional funding because of change orders that took place. So that's the nature of the first one. The nature of the last two could be the only two mistakes in putting the budget together where items were overlooked or understated because of data entry errors, or it could be they were cut and then not put back in when it was realized that they had to be covered for, a certain level of expense. If you remember, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we did a budget adjustment for the police department. There were 4 accounts that had been cut in half, in fact, maybe more than in half, back during the mayor's budget preparation. And those were never looked at again in the whole review of the police department budget, all the way up through when it was adopted at the council level. And so those accounts were badly underfunded, underappropriated, and that's why they had to be adjusted, because they weren't going to be able to operate this year with those level of expenses. For one, with their fuel supplies, vehicle supplies, their fuel costs were cut in half. And it's like, even though they're going to go anti-idling, it's like they're not going to save 50% of their fuel, or else they're just not going to drive their cars as much, one or the other. So they had to increase that back to the relative levels that they've experienced for years past for their fuel costs. Now, obviously, with gas prices going down, that fuel cost is going to be less of an impact this year, so that's going to help.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Jeff, are you still looking for a motion to move those items to the agenda?
I think we've lost him.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I don't see him on the call anymore.
Mayor, Beth, can I make that motion?
You and the mayor can, right, Dean?
Okay, so I'll make the motion to move items 2.1 and 2.2 to the regular agenda for the evening.
Second.
Counselor Moore? Oh, he's gone. Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Mayor Reed?
Yes.
Okay, without Jeff here, I'll go ahead and run the meeting. Is there any old business? Okay, seeing none. Is there any new business? Anything from counselors that you'd like to discuss as new business?
I have a question. Because we were out doing yard work around here, and the sidewalks that have cracks in them, the grass tends to grow across those cracks. And if it isn't taken out of there, it ends up splitting the concrete. And I know a year or so ago, the council passed a resolution to ban the use of herbicides in the city, on city property. And I wondered how Public Works is going to maintain those sidewalks so that that's taken care of without tremendous amount of individual labor that would be required, rather than spraying the crack with an herbicide that would kill the grass that's growing in that crack. And I don't know if Mike is still here, or if he has if there's any flexibility. I didn't read the resolution that exists around that.
You're asking the use of herbicides is permitted?
Well, exactly. The issue I saw was there are a couple sidewalks out, and one of them was our sidewalk, so it's not a city sidewalk necessarily. But you get a crack in the sidewalk, dirt gets in there, grass grows, and essentially it's going to break up the sidewalk even more. To get that out manually takes quite a bit of time, and I wondered what flexibility Public Works has as you're going around sidewalks to actually spray a crack, or is there an absolute ban entirely for anything around herbicides?
My understanding is there's an absolute ban as far as the city, using it within the city limits. There was a resolution passed, I wanna say 3 years ago, Counselor.
Okay, I'm just my question.
Specialized, head attachments for our, trimmers, when we do our own sidewalks and common areas.
So you're using a string trimmer or something to clean out that crack or get the grass out of
We're
that?
using a string trimmer actually with a wire brush head on it to do particularly pavers or troublesome, so around the monuments. We have all the pavers and a lot of the cracks you're talking about on the common sidewalks. We have to buy specialized tools. It is a burden to us, to be honest, being not being able to use herbicides, particularly in those areas. But that's the rule.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Ira, Beth, please tell me if I'm wrong, but I think I pulled up the resolution and it appears there is a little bit of flexibility. So it looks like it was October 10th, 2019. We reaffirmed the resolution from 2015. The 2015 resolution was aspirational. It encouraged the city departments and city residents to refrain from the use of herbicides. And it notes the issue at on the Terry Gordon bike path across from the Lake Forest facility. And then it reaffirms what we did in 15, but then further resolved, and here's the language, that city departments shall refrain from any use of pesticides and herbicides in the maintenance of city property absent written approval from the mayor. It is further resolved that no pesticides or herbicide may be used by private parties on city property absent written approval. So we do have a little flexibility there.
Okay, thank you.
I have something. I got a request from a constituent. They were concerned about the maintenance of the heritage trail over by the Crete and the beach. One thing that they've mentioned is that the trash cans located in the upper pavilion in front of the Cabana Bar are full, mostly with pet waste, and that the boardwalk trail is covered in sand, and they're wanting to know if that could be cleared off of sand.
Counselor, we're on the agenda for things done when we get a chance to do them. So,
Thanks.
It's just that we've been so busy with other things right now. When we get to it, we'll clean the trails up and we'll work on the boardwalk.
Perfect, thanks. I got another call from a constituent, and I checked it out. They were asking, this may not be answerable by Mike or Mike, but there's a little south of Scamotion Creek, near the Set Point Apartments. There's a pole that looks like it has a camera on it. And I was wondering, does anyone know what that camera is for? If it's filming or what that's for?
And then we discussed that before, those cameras, the light sensors for the new LED street lights.
I don't think it's counted.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what anyone just said, if there was an answer.
I think we discussed it before, Mayor Reed and Mike and I are thinking we call it being a sensor potential light. Certain people were worried it was a camera, and I don't believe that's the case. That was a question for Levi. It's nothing that we put in.
It's nowhere near the light though, because it's over near it's like across the street from I Care for the Adirondacks there.
Again, that's probably would be, like I said, it's not something that we would do. I think Bill can help you out on that one.
Yeah, I'll reach out to Bill.
Yeah, I would start there, and then I don't think the state put anything there either. We would know about it.
Any other items of new business for infrastructure? Okay, seeing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Roll call?
Is Council Moore back on yet? No. Council Gibbs?
Yes.
Mayor Reed?
Yes. We can begin our work session for the common council meeting. Gives you an opportunity to have an extended conversation on, I think, a pretty light agenda for tonight.
I don't have any further questions about agenda items, but I would like to talk to the council, especially since we have Richard in on the meeting. Somebody brought this to me as a suggestion, and I thought it might be worth discussing with the whole council and with Richard. I noticed that John, Mike, and Mike they're wearing their face masks, and I think it would be a really good idea to create a line item on the budget for any COVID-19 expenses, and with the anticipation that there's going to be FEMA reimbursement at the end of all of this. So any expenses incurred as a result, if there's overtime with our public safety, if there's cleaning supplies, if there's rubber gloves and masks, like those kinds of things, I think it's worth having that added to our, the budget process for future reimbursement. Mike, what do you think?
You're asking this, Mike. We're already tracking all the COVID-19 related items, both in timesheets and in budget items for the purpose.
We've created pay types, and we're going to be adjusting the hours back to March 13th as far as the police and the fire department to detail the time that their individuals have spent doing specific COVID-19 or virus duties. And we can go back and reprocess by adding that time in at this point. And of course, going forward, we're going to use those accounts. We have salary and hourly virus accounts, and we have the overtime accounts as well. We also have a sick leave account for anybody who has been quarantined or will be sidelined because of the virus, and we'll be tracking those sick leave costs separately as well, all with the intention of, reimbursement based on the stimulus package that's coming out. And also under the expenses, we're tracking the individual expenses in the same line items for materials and supplies or whatever, but we're highlighting them as COVID-19 or virus expenditures so that we can pull them all together when the time comes through for reimbursement.
We also have to use the term isolation quarantine very precisely. Only ones eligible according to the federal law are isolation quarantine ordered by the Clinton County Health Department. So one cannot say that there's quarantining their employees without a letter from Clinton County Health Department.
That is what we're following. Right now, we've got 2 individuals that were quarantined, and we requested Department of Health certification on them, and we received it.
Thank you.
Now, is John there to talk about the item number 7B?
He is.
Stone Environmental agreement.
Good evening.
Hi, John. Could you just tell me a little bit about that agreement?
Okay, so this is being funded under the Lake Champlain Basin Program. What the study's going to do is it's going to analyze our stormwater system, which should not have any wastewater. It's going to analyze the stormwater system to see if there are any illicit connections from any residential, commercial, or industrial sources of wastewater. So they'll be looking at a number of parameters in like 41 different catchment areas. See if there's any signs of potentially there could be wastewater, and if they find some indicators, then they'll drill down into those subsections more closely. The ultimate goal is to reduce the number of pathogens, the amount of phosphorus and toxic metals that might be entering the receiving waters through the stormwater system.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Hey, John, before you disappear,
What's that?
I'm sorry, is the Lake Champlain grant, is that the total that this project is? Is there a match from the city, or is the 20
There's
grand
a
covered?
$1,500 match.
That's right.
We're planning on providing, hopefully through in-kind services, so.
Okay.
If it's cash, it's $1,500. If, we can use in-kind services and it won't cost anything.
Yep, for sure. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, and now that we have Richard, I'm curious as to continue our conversation from last week. Richard, I know you weren't here last week, but I'm curious to get your opinion on how this COVID-19 pandemic is affecting the budget. I know Mike gave a presentation last week where his rough estimate of that this could possibly affect the budget, depending on how long it lasts. I think his amount was $3.7 million, which is roughly about 16% of the general fund budget. So I wanted to get your opinion on that, and any other information you can impart to the council on how you think the COVID-19 pandemic will affect the budget.
Well, obviously at this point, we don't have a budget deficit because of it. The items I think put together, I wasn't part of doing it. I don't have any input to it, but I guess they're projections and based on anticipated outcomes because of the virus. I checked to see about the AIM funding, and that was issued yesterday. And so far the city's AIM funding is still at the same level as 2019. 2,648,880. So that hasn't been reduced officially, but if that was one of the items that's discussed, that could possibly be adjusted because of budget criteria. At this point, if we were looking at covering that $3.7 million out of the general fund entirely, just to give you a perspective of how big that number is, the general fund contractual expenses, like Councilor Gibbs was discussing, all the 4,000 accounts, the total of that is only $3.7 million, $3,775,000. So if we were to say that we have to recover that much, $3.7 million, that means that if we were to do it all through contractual expense, we wouldn't have any light, heat, electricity, paper, contract services, anything at all. That's how large of a number that is. If you're looking at it in relation to people costs, obviously the general fund is 75% personnel costs between payroll and benefits. And if we were to say that 3.5 million, 3.7 million is the target, we're looking at roughly 60 people that it takes to make that up. The average cost of an individual just for payroll and FICA expense, the matching FICA expense the employer has to pay each week, is roughly $60,000 for the 130 people that are charged to the general fund. So if you figure on taking, some expenses out of the contractual service area, and if some other items are going to, be reduced here and there, let's just round it to 50 people. That means you're looking at reducing your staff to 80 people in the general fund for an entire year.
Richard, since you're right there, do you happen to know what the budget for the entire employee force of the city for overtime is?
Sure, I can get that for you. This is across the city, not just the general fund, right?
Yes. What's the total budget for overtime currently? Because I looked at the most recent document that Julie sent us by email, and it looks like we've already spent about $350,000 in overtime, and it's only April 8th.
That's correct. Okay. Yeah, the report she puts, that she sent you, we put together each week. And that's based on pay types that we pull out of the system for overtime and also for standby and shift differential. So that's $358,000 spent to date.
Right.
The total budget for overtime across the city is $624,240. The two big hitters in that, obviously, are the $266,000 each that was set for the police and the fire departments. You remember those meetings? You and the other counselors decided we're going to try and set those numbers at 266 and adhere to them through other adjustments to time and usage and so forth. The actual cost for the police in 2019 was $314,000. The actual cost for the fire was $320,000. So the whole budget across the city, all departments, $624,240.
Thanks, Richard.
Sounds like last year the police and fire department put together equaled pretty much that. You said 314 and 320 or so.
Yep. Hold on just a second.
What was the actual overtime for all departments last year, not the budgeted amount?
All right, let me grab that. All right, hold on. I was just giving you the general fund. That 624,240 was just general fund. Last year, general fund, the total was 747,711. Across the entire city, it's $1,026,373. And the total spent across the city last year was $1,123,000. So we were over what we budgeted this year. But then again, this year's numbers were deliberately reduced. So excuse me on that, 624,240 is the revised budget for general fund only this year, and the actual spent last year was 747. Whereas, police was 314, fire was 321. Now they're both set at 266 this year. Just to give you a rough idea, 14,000 roughly for rec complexes budgeted, 3,000 for parking lots, 65,500 for water, 152,000 for sewer, 4,800 for the library. Total $1,026,373 is this year's budget. I can send you this if you need to see it. Just let me know.
Thanks, Richard.
You're welcome. So anyway, just the rough idea of that large of a budget deficit, that would hit hard, obviously. It could take several months or maybe even a year for it to materialize. If the anticipation is that we're going to lose a significant portion of our property taxes due to people not being able to pay, eventually those property taxes will be collected. The timing is going to be an issue. We won't lose on those because those follow the property. It'd be unfortunate if we have to go through foreclosures after this is over because people lose their homes. Nobody wants to see that. But when I first started working for the city, there was over 110 properties that hadn't paid property taxes for several years, and it represented over $1 million. We eventually collected the property taxes on all but 14 of those properties, and we had to foreclose on the 14 and sell them at auction, and we recovered all those taxes. It takes time, but generally it only takes about, you'd have to say, the time of a redemption period, about 21 months. So we wouldn't lose that entirely, but it would be a cash flow issue. The main part of that cash flow issue was obviously that, if you have to go out and seek funding for that, you can. There's tax anticipation notes that can be floated. There's revenue anticipation notes that can be floated. There's also, in really extreme cases like this would represent, there's budget deficiency notes that can be floated, but for a shorter period of time. The one problem with what we have right now, I think, a more critical issue than the anticipated impact of this 6 months, 9 months down the line, is we do have a $2.2 million surplus in the general fund, but it's not represented by cash. So if it's a rainy day fund, which obviously this is, and that surplus has been built by taxpayers' surpluses being paid into the city. The ironic part about it is if we need to use it right now, we don't have any cash in the general fund really to speak of to spend that surplus down. And that's unfortunate because we've advanced so much on capital projects and DRI expenses that we're going to have to go out into the market and borrow. And I sent this information at the end of last year and updated it in January of this year. We have to borrow roughly $8 million. And the general fund has $3.2 million of receivables on its books, $2.1 million from capital projects fund and $1.1 million for DRI advances. And we know the DRI advances are going to come slow, but they'll come eventually. However, what we normally do to get the cash back in the bank for the general fund is we go out and float a bond issue for our capital spending. And we haven't done that yet. MLD's depreciation fund is down to $91,000. And that's because they've taken $2.9 million out of it to buy land, parcels to move to. They couldn't move to the one, obviously, because of zoning complications, but they did move to the other one. They're due $2.3 million from the city to pay for the two parcels of land that the city now owns, which is the waterfront parcel where the buildings are being demolished and one's being repurposed as a farmer's market. And the other one is on Reeves Lane that is going to be slated for commercial development at this point. That $2.3 million is essential to put back in their depreciation fund in case they have a catastrophic impact to their system. Now, it's unlikely at this point in time that we're going to have an ice storm that could impact them or an earthquake or something, but still getting that cash back in the bank by floating these debt instruments is essential, and we have to do that as soon as we can. I think that's the more critical piece of what we have to do right now to get cash in our bank accounts in case we have to weather some storms before we see the critical impact that might come from, lost sales taxes, lost collections of property taxes, reductions in AIM funding, and also expenses that we'd have to incur for the disease itself, for the virus fighting itself. Worst case has happened to us though right now regarding that bonding. The bond markets right now for mutual issues has kind of been scrambled and shut down. People have panicked so much with stock markets and bond market changes. They've sold everything off to the point where nobody's out there buying municipal bonds for their mutual funds or for their secondary markets. Right now, you probably can't float a bond issue. Our plan was to float it in April, this month. And of course, it wasn't going to affect debt service until next year. We might have to wait 2 months before we can get a feeler on that to see if there's going to be any kind of a bond market that would be interested in a $5.7 million issue from the city, either bonds or a ban, which is a bond anticipation note. And then the $2.3 million that has to be floated as a taxable bond or ban issue because it's commercial development being acquired. Land for commercial development being acquired. It's probably also going to have a shorter life on it, about a 5-year payment term life on it instead of 15 or 20 or 30 years like land would have normally. We're going to get clarification on that to make sure that we know what the outcome of that funding is going to be. But pretty much we're in a holding pattern until the bond markets get organized again. They're working from home, and that's not working really well from what I hear. And there's just not a lot of activity out there. There's some very reputable jurisdictions trying to float issues right now, and nobody's interested in buying from what I'm being told. But a couple of months it can turn around, obviously. So the immediate issue for us, I think, is to get the cash back in the bank. If we float those bond issues, and then we'll have, you know, money that represents our surplus that we can use for the rainy day if we get a really bad rainy day here. And then also going forward, if funding is necessary, we can always look to temporary funding through TANs and RANs and deficit bonds.
So Richard, you're saying that you don't have any access to ready cash in the short term?
We do. We can do some internal borrowing. Um, we do have some balances between funds that are in place right now, and we can do some more of that. But you know, the caution there is that we have to make them short-term in nature. We can't carry them over a year end or over a year fiscal period, because then we're, you know, suspect to saying it's more than temporary funding. But yes, we do have access to some of that at this point. We have several balances that we could borrow from internally and pay interest to if we absolutely have to have a cash need. The best part about this time of the year is property taxes are being collected, and actually it's pretty brisk. The cash is coming in. So it's not the time of year when the general fund is normally in a cash deficit. That happens in November, December, January, and February. Now we're recovering from that. We're getting cash back because of property tax collection. So, you know, for now, I think we're comfortable enough that, you know, if we see some expenses that we need to cover, we're going to be able to do it. If we have to do some internal borrowing, we're going to have to do it. But long term, we've got to get that big pile of cash back into the general fund and back into MLD's funds.
Do we have to pay the prevailing interest rate in the muni bond market when we borrow from one fund to against another? I think the muni rate has tripled in the last couple of weeks, highest since the last Great Recession, and the Federal Reserve is putting literally $1 trillion into trying to bail it out so it doesn't fail completely.
Yeah, I heard that. I heard that they're trying to stimulate the bond market by going in and buying, and that's a good thing because that'll stabilize it some. But no, we only have to recognize interest at our internal cost of funds. And right now, we can only save at 1%. All of our ICS accounts that were up at I think it was 1.85% when we finalized our banking RFP. It's come down from 1.85 to 1. So we would have to pay back those surplus funds at 1%, which is our internal rate of earnings or cost of funds.
Any other questions in the working session?
Yes, Richard, the mayor and I did our separate calculations to try and figure out what will be the impact of the coronavirus on the city's finances. And we came to a number that is remarkably similar. I think the mayor came up with 3.5 million and I came up with 3.7 million. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think, and you've talked about it a little bit already, but do you think that those numbers are accurate?
It'd be great if I could see what you guys put together because I can look at it too. I mean,
okay,
I understand that, you know, there's going to be some additional costs and there's going to be some revenue losses. Yeah, sales tax is going to be an issue. Nobody's buying new cars. Nobody's going to be traveling much. Gas prices are down. Retail stores are pretty much slowed down, if not closed. So there's going to be a lot of sales tax impact. Are we going to lose half of it, which is, you know, $4 million for the city? I don't know if it would be that extreme at this point.
We think 25%, Richard.
25% would be $1 million.
Yeah.
If the AIM funding was one of them, And that's, like I said, the report just came out and said that all the cities are still funded just as last year. They haven't been reduced like the other villages, towns, and smaller municipalities were, based on them not having a budgeted aim factor of more than 2% of their operating budget. Our city, it's roughly 10%, a little bit over 10%,
I
2.6
think
million.
the governor has alarmed me a little bit in saying that he's going to review that AIM funding for the entire year about 3 times between now and the end of the year. Now, I just have a strong feeling they're going to cut something from the some amount from the AIM funding, but we'll we'll have to wait and see what that is. Unfortunately, that's the whole thing that's alarming about this is that the the projections are not good, but they may not be 100% accurate. But I feel like we have to do something. Like we have to assume that there's going to be a certain loss in revenue this year, and that we have to respond to that somehow. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. The only thing that's hard to do is with that level of reduction, still providing services, with half the people or, 50 people less in the general fund is going to be difficult. And,
Right.
Like my department, there's 10 people. I think DPW has 15 people assigned to the general fund that are costed 100% there. Community development's 4 people. Building inspector, 5 people. City clerk, 3 people. So unfortunately, to get that large a number in cost reductions, if we're looking at personnel, it's going to have to come out of the public safety areas where they have roughly 80 people or, just under 80 people. And that's difficult because obviously public safety is an issue right now. It's been escalated to a much higher level than normal. So how do we do that is the hard part to imagine. I mean, it's very difficult to understand how to make that kind of a cut, and it's just a matter of seeing how bad it's going to be. Now, obviously, with the AIM funding, they still say that we're going to get as much as we got last year. I don't see the city of New York on here. And I would think that they'd be under a lot of pressure to leave New York cities alone because they're fighting, the epicenter of the disease. So, and how much of the stimulus package, the 2.2 trillion that's going to come out, how much of that is going to support things like what the mayor just talked about, infusing funds into the bond market to keep it from crashing. And, how much is going to be there for funding of people's costs while they're on unemployment or being furloughed or however it's going to be handled.
Yes. Yeah, there's some pretty generous terms being made for people who are going on unemployment. I think the government's promising to pay 100% of salaries, at least for a short term, maybe 4 months.
Yeah. And unemployment is, the first week's been eliminated for qualification. The basic's 504, but there's a $600 supplemental coverage, I think, for 13 weeks.
Right.
They can bring people up to $1,100 a week. Now, of course, a lot of people are making jokes about that. It's like, hey, I'll make more money staying home than I will going to work, because they're saying they're going to get that total net, but eventually they're going to pay taxes on it, but it's down the line. It's not going to have any withholding on it at this point. So,
yeah, I think the thing the city would be doing in a scenario like that would be moving the finances for our employees from us, the taxpayers, to the federal government, and the federal government's willing to do that right now.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it will last, but there is that help for us at this point to think about. Richard, I think that next week is our finance committee meeting, and perhaps we can get together Jeff and me and you and the mayor and talk about this some between now and next Thursday, if that's acceptable to you.
Sure. Yep. I'm here every day.
Yeah.
Since I'm in a separate office, just keeping track of things, and I definitely remote from home when I need to. One thing about the unemployment I wanted to mention, it's kind of interesting because most businesses are in a pooled fund for unemployment. The city's a direct pay for all of our costs. And normally somebody who's not on unemployment, we would pay directly for the $504 per week that they would get as a maximum. Haven't heard how that would be reimbursed under this care package, and I haven't heard how the $600 supplemental would be reimbursed as well. I don't know if the city would have to pay that first and apply for reimbursement for it, if it would just be, the 504 would be costed and reimbursed, and the 600 is direct to the employees. So still a lot of unanswered questions about that.
Absolutely. That'd be a good thing to find out just as soon as possible.
I'm going to look into that for next week to make sure that I can try and get an answer on it.
Okay, great.
If there's no other item for work session, I think it's time to begin the common council meeting with the pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
To the coast of the nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mayor Reed,
Present.
Councilor Barbell,
Here.
Councilor Kelly,
Here.
Councilor Gibbs,
Here.
Councilor DeDominicus,
Here.
Councilor McFarland, Councilor Moore,
Here.
I've got no comments tonight. Please continue.
Resolved that the minutes of the regular meeting of the Common Council held on April 2nd, 2020 are approved and placed on file among the public records of the city clerk's office.
Moved by Councilor DeDominicus and seconded by Councilor Barbell. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Just put up your hand, by the way, it'd be easier. Please continue.
Resolved that the payrolls of the various departments of the city of Plattsburgh for the week ending April 8th, 2020 in the amount of $467,310.44 are authorized and allowed, and the mayor and the city clerk are hereby empowered and directed to sign warrants drawn on the city chamberlain for the payment thereof.
Moved by Councilor Kelly, seconded by Councilor Moore. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. Got your usual packet, the report for the weekend. I hope that all the various electronic documents working well for you seems to be. Beginning with additional reports for governance, city operations, Councilor Barbell.
Yes, it's just a couple of things. I haven't heard back yet from Matt on the RFP status with the marina. And I'm hoping, and maybe the next week, that we'll have some concrete information about that as to where that stands and whether or not there's some potential to incorporate the Wilcox Dock slips as well into that RFP that was not included before. And secondly, I'm just as I was walking down the Terry Gordon path this morning, saw two, I assume they were police officers, but anyway, with bulletproof vests coming out of the back of the gym. And I wondered if we're still using the gym for that people are using that gym like police department for meetings, exercise, whatever. If they are, I'd like to know about it in case somebody that's living in that area sees people going in and out of the gym and using the gym in some way. But that's it.
Yeah, I've got nothing more to report on the marina. I guess I thought a couple of months ago that it was in motion and it was to be resolved, but that was February 3rd. That will pass off to not expecting a report on that. I think last time you asked Mr. Miller about it, he was advocating for the city to run it this summer, if I recall. That was probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
That's correct, yeah, and I think that's by the wayside now. I think he was going to go back and see about the potential of adding Wilcox, and he thought that they were still ready to move with the RFP with some modification about the amount of upfront money that would have to be put on the table in the current RFP.
Yes, where I recall it stood. I've not heard any reports up until an inquiry today, and I further asked what was going on, and sounds like it's still in limbo.
Okay.
We haven't renewed the insurance yet on the marina, so it is something that I need to find out about pretty quickly, what we're gonna do, because that renewal is due May 1st.
Mayor, if you'd like, I'd be glad to give Matt a call and just ask him for an update to go to you and on this.
I think you need to work through Beth, but certainly we'll just direct your questions.
Okay, I will. All right.
Sorry. City Infrastructure, Councilor Moore.
I kind of missed most of the meeting, so we just had our meeting, and I defer to Councilor Gibbs as to what happened.
Well, yes, we had a regular meeting. We did discuss how a lot of our anticipated road projects this year, everything's up in the air and uncertain, including the Cogan Avenue project. And John was able to explain item 7B from the agenda, and that is what we talked about in infrastructure.
Thank you. Finance and Budget, Councilor Kelly. I think you're muted still.
Sorry. As we discussed during the work session, our meeting is next week, and I particularly want to have a focus on the potential for a financial crisis if the revenues don't materialize as we expect they will. So I'd really like to talk with Mr. Marks and the mayor and Jeff about what we can do going forward. That's sort of an ongoing discussion we need to have. We've had it, and maybe things aren't going exactly as we planned, but let's continue to discuss that. We're going to get out of this coronavirus crisis. Things will get better, and when they do, I just want to make sure that the city of Plattsburgh comes out on the other side of it in good financial condition. So let's have a discussion about that as soon as possible, say early next week, and then we'll have something to report to the council next Thursday.
Just another point of interest on that. I'm working in the AUD this week and just about finalized the general fund numbers, and the fund balance is 2.26 million for the general fund after the results for 2019 being included.
Man, that is excellent. That is excellent to hear. Thank you.
Public Safety, Councilor Gibbs.
No updates at this time.
Plattsburgh Public Library, Councilor DeDominicus.
Actually, if I could just ask Patrick, I missed Monday, and I didn't know if there was anything that from Monday's meeting that the council should know.
To tell you the truth, not really. I had a nice conversation with Ann, and she was talking about some things that she's going to bring to the board, but nothing really concrete. I'm sure we could probably set up another meeting with her to talk to her more throughout how the library is planning on dealing with the crisis. But right now, I think the library board has hold off making any decisions.
Okay, thanks again. I appreciate it.
MLD Board President Councilor McFarland.
No updates at this time.
All the reports are hereby ordered and received, and any written reports are placed on file among the public records of the city clerk's office. Moved by Councilor Dominicus, second by Councilor Barbell. All in favor, raise your hand. Opposed? Passed. According to the recommendation boards at this time, please continue.
Resolved that the bills audited by the Common Council for the week ending April 10th, 2020 in the amount of $797,188.49 are authorized and allowed, and the mayor and the city clerk are hereby authorized and directed to sign warrants drawn on the city chamberlain for the payment thereof.
So moved.
Moved by Councilor DeDominicis, second by Councilor Kelly. Discussion? All in favor? Raise your hand.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. There's no people present today that want to testify. We'll give it 30 seconds on the chat on YouTube. Did you receive any comments by email today?
None.
And there appears to be no members from the public who wish to comment at this time.
Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore the Common Council approves the city chamberlain to adjust the 2020 general fund, parking fund, and water fund budgets for unbudgeted or under budgeted costs of $27,500, $1,850, and $63,000 respectively.
Moved by Councilor Kelly and second by Councilor Barbell. Further discussion? I know you discussed it during work session. Seeing none, roll call.
Councilor Barbell?
Yes.
Councilor Kelly? Councilor
Yes.
Kelly? Oh.
Yes.
Councilor Gibbs?
No.
Councilor DeDominicis?
Yes.
Councilor McFarland?
Councilor McFarland?
Oh, sorry, no.
Councilor Moore?
Yes.
I think 4 affirmative, 2 negative.
Yes. Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore the Common Council approves and agrees to and authorizes entering into an agreement with Stone Environmental per their March 12th, 2020 proposal in the amount of $20,000.
Moved by Councilor McFarland, second by Councilor Barbell. Discussion. Roll call.
Councilor Barbell?
Yes.
Councilor Kelly?
Yes.
Councilor Gibbs?
Yes.
Councilor DeDominicis?
Yes.
Councilor McFarland?
Yes.
Councilor Moore?
Yes.
No travel request for resolutions for consideration. Any new business or council reports?
I wanted to, talk about a little about the zoning board piece in the paper today. Seemed to imply that they were going to set up a Zoom meeting now to allow up to 100 people to participate in the comment periods of their meeting. Is that, did I understand that correctly, or how are they looking at doing those?
Yeah, I'll touch on that. So I was participating or serving as counsel to the ZBA as well as the planning board Monday night and Tuesday night respectively. So that came up because those boards are independent and they set their own procedures. And some board members were very concerned about having any further proceedings or any board action until there was greater ability for the public to participate. And that was not in a vacuum. There is some guidance from NICOM, which came out on Friday, which further clarified. We all know that we're permitted to have these looser remote hearings under the open meetings law, but the unresolved portion was the public hearing portion, which isn't spelled out in the open meetings law. It's just a requirement for various zoning boards, special use permits, or planning board actions, the public hearing component. The public hearings in general are not really defined well by statute or by case law, but the underlying concept is to invoke the maximum amount of public participation as possible so that the board can get a sense of the public and everyone can have the right to be heard. So with that additional guidance from NICOM, as well as the technical abilities of Zoom to allow for people to be characterized as in different roles during a Zoom meeting, where right now everyone that's here has a microphone in front of them and is essentially a panelist. But there's also a feature where someone from the public could show up as an attendee, where they can see what's occurring. They might have a video feed, but they can't speak unless the moderator hands them the virtual microphone. So with that technical ability through Zoom, we presented that to the boards as an option to hopefully appease their desires for this greater participation through a public hearing. And seemingly they like the ability to do that. So with that general direction, we're working with the respective board chairs to put temporary procedures in place to really solidify how those public hearings will go forward to allow this important business to continue.
And I assume, Dean, you've attended a number of planning board meetings and zoning board meetings? And what's the attendance usually at those meetings?
Public attendance?
Yeah.
For a quote unquote normal situation, very low. You might have a neighbor or two that has an interest in a parcel, in a project that's right next door to them. Obviously, we have some projects that have generated more public participation. And so more recently, if that was your question, ballpark maybe 20 to 25 attendees.
Okay, so this is a pretty rare occasion.
What's rare, to have over 100 people?
Well, no, not, to have more than the individual requesting the variance or from either of them, other than a couple other neighbors that might be living right next to them. It's fairly rare that you're going to have a huge lot of public comment. Is that correct? I take your nod as being
yes.
Correct. So this is solely all around the DRI?
I don't want to say solely. I think it's, there was very forceful comments presented to board members and to the board in general saying, how dare you have these meetings without the ability for the public to participate? And, some, as a legal conclusion, I stood strong to the fact that planning boards and zoning boards are permitted to continue to meet under the governor's orders, that these are not non-essential, these are specifically essential and do, are allowed under the governor's orders to go forward to meetings in general. So this change was to accommodate the desire of the board to further allow public participation for the public hearing component, which almost all, if not all, of the pending applications, all the way down to a special use permit for a fence, all the way up to the Durkee project, all do trigger the public hearing requirement. So it was the best way forward to appease the majority of the board to allow these meetings to continue.
It was just clearing for me, I guess. This isn't the first public hearing that the planning board has had on either of these projects, whether it's the Vilas home or DRI or other aspects of the effort. There are at least I would assume there have been at least a couple of public hearings prior to this
There,
meeting that is
there,
coming.
there was a initial public hearing on the DRI projects was in the February meetings, and those were attended, and there was maybe 20 to 30 in-person comments made to those projects, but the boards at the end of each meeting adjourned the public hearing. They didn't close it, and that left it open. And then all of a sudden, the sky fell a few weeks later.
Okay, no, I just wanted to understand, yeah, but so this is a process that is not just limited to the planning board. If we wanted to have a public meeting or whatever, or a meeting where we're inviting more people in around a particular issue, I'm thinking of well, it doesn't matter what I'm thinking of. That potential of having up to 100 people or something like that participating in some way on a controversial issue with the council, that's available through this mechanism we have at the city.
Yes, I mean, as you can see from tonight's agenda in the past few weeks, the agenda has been fairly pared down with, I would say non-controversial items. But in the event we did introduce a local law or had some other Kogan Avenue kind of scenario where there was a lot of public interest, then it's up to this board to develop procedures that keeps everyone safe first and foremost. And if the project is important and needs some review, then either develop those comments or don't develop those other platforms or don't, with the underlying goal of trying to provide the best and most public participation as possible under the circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Please note that we haven't constrained public opinion in any way as far as the council is concerned. They've been able to get any comment in written form or attend personally. We've guaranteed them that they can maintain all social distancing if they chose to attend in person. I don't think anybody has yet, except for some of the staff participants, but that has never been precluded to any of the members of the public through this forum.
No, I'm more interested in some of the capabilities of the Zoom meetings and how that works, and whether that's a difficult thing if we wanted to do it somewhere down the road differently.
Any other new business or council reports?
Yeah, I had one thing that I think we need to revisit. Our local law regarding the registration of rental units and whatever, we've kind of blown by the March 1st, 2020 deadline for setting fees and fleshing this.
Jeff, just to cut you off, did you see the email I sent you about around 4 o'clock today?
Yes, I did, and that's
Okay.
what just wanted to know what we would need to do to fix this and move forward with it. I know we had some very productive discussions with some of the people that were landlords, and I think we were getting somewhere. Obviously, we haven't been able to meet, and I was just wondering what we should do to continue on with this.
So I don't want to, obviously I sent it a half an hour before the meeting. It's been a busy day. So I didn't expect for the board by any means to want to discuss it in detail tonight. I would suggest that everyone spend some time over the next few days to review what I'd sent, compare the two documents. I don't want to get into too much detail because there has been a threat of litigation. So if we want to have a more specific conversation, we should go into executive or have one-on-ones. But in general, I did send you the email, attorney-client confidentiality, so it's not subject to FOIL necessarily, but there's some meat in that. So if it's something that you can review closely. If everyone's comfortable or not, make comments, review it. We need some input from Joe, and then we can push it forward. And actually, that's a good question, because for that potential change or any other potential local law that could be out there that would trigger the need for a public hearing, which that was the question that Ira just had, as far as if we would want to tackle some legislation while we're dealing with this remote conferencing. So to summarize, I would say everyone should spend a little time when they have a chance to just review what I'd sent.
Okay, thanks, Dean. I just knew we had to mention that we were looking into that, I believe. so that we hadn't forgotten about it.
Yep, and I've been in touch with one of the representatives of the Landlord Coalition.
Great.
Any further new business or council reports? Let's give 30 seconds more for see if anybody'd like to come on a live chat. Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councilor Moore, second by Councilor McFarland. Roll call.
Counselor Barbell,
Yes.
Counselor Kelly,
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs,
Yes.
Counselor DeDominicus,
Yes.
Counselor McFarland,
Yes, please.
Counselor Moore,
Yes.
Stay safe. All I know the people who've come to visit me, including my guests here, have all been wearing their masks. I really, really appreciate it. You might notice I don't have my mask on, but I'm the only person usually in this building, except for Richard downstairs. But I do appreciate everybody doing their part to keep our vulnerable population safe. So stay safe yourself and have a good week. Bye-bye.